Good morning, church. Well, my name is Tyler. I am the pastor on staff here. We're super glad that you're joining us, whether it's in person, whether it's online. We are a church that exists to connect people with Jesus. That's what we hope, that while you're here, you will get to connect with the God of the universe who knows you, who loves you, who wants a relationship with you. If you got a Bible with you, we're going to open it up. We're going to spend a time studying the Word. Flip it open to Esther chapter 2, verse 19. We got a little bit of work to do in chapter 2 before we dive into chapter 3 today. Esther chapter 2, verse 19 is where we're going to start today. We've been walking through the book of Esther. We're in this series called When God Seems Hidden. We've been walking through kind of chapter by chapter is the rough outline, although we're going to break that a little bit. If you didn't know this, the book, the chapter and verses of the books are not original with the language. Somebody went in afterwards and added those so we could study them better. So we're going to use them as a rough outline, but we're going to break from course a few times. Today is one of those where we're just going to work through the main story of the book of Esther, this book where the name of God is never mentioned. But that doesn't make him any less of a main character in this story. God is in the story all throughout. He just seems hidden. And we get to do the work of trying to figure out where is God behind the scenes, which is, for most of us, how we live our life. You don't often see God showing up in direct, obvious ways in the day-to-day of life. And a lot of times we ask ourselves, where is God in this situation? And so we're studying through the book of Esther. As we get to see God clearly work through this story, hopefully it'll help us see God clearly working in our own story. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to pray for us, and then we're going to walk through this story today. Heavenly Father, God, I just pray that you would make your presence known to us today. That we'd be intentional right now about spending time with you, that we wouldn't let our mind wander, that we wouldn't let the thoughts that are creeping in, the to-do list, the lunch plans, the various things that are grabbing at our attention, Lord, we wouldn't let those distract us from this moment with you right now. And instead, Lord, I pray that we would be content at nothing less than sitting at your feet and hearing what it is that you have to say. And Lord, I pray that this would be your message, not mine. That in any way possible I would decrease, that you would increase in this place. That it be your name that's glorified, your name that's magnified. In your name I pray. Amen. Well, if you've been around very long, you know that I'm a little bit of a movie buff. I love to watch movies. I love to go to the movie theater. And there's one particular movie that I watched in the theater that I will never forget the theater experience. It was Avengers Infinity War. Now, if you've seen the movie, you understand probably why that was. The movie is the culmination of a whole bunch of Marvel movies. They've been building up to this one single movie where we're introduced to the biggest bad, the most evil villain that the Marvel Cinematic Universe has seen yet, a purple guy named Thanos. And Thanos is trying to collect a bunch of rocks that have secret powers, and using them he can destroy half of all life across the universe. That's his mission and his goal. And in the opening scene of the movie, we see Thanos and some of his minions fighting three of the most powerful superheroes in the entire Marvel universe at this point: Hulk, Thor, and Loki. And in the opening scene, all three of our heroes are laying down, defeated, absolutely just wrecked by Thanos. I mean, they didn't even put up a fighting chance. He's beaten them without really even putting much effort forth. And you just go, oh, okay, this is going to be a different kind of movie. Not really the superhero movie I thought it was going to be, but surely our heroes will prevail in the end. And as you move through the movie, there's a typical conflicts, and you think they're going to lose, and then they come back, and then they think they're going to lose, and then they come back, and at the very end of the movie, sorry for the spoiler alert, cover your ears if you don't want to hear this part, Thanos wins. He collects all the stones, he snaps his finger, and half of all life in the entire universe vanishes into thin air. And then the credits roll. And I'll never forget walking out of the movie theater with my friends just going, what did I just watch? I came in to see a superhero movie about the good guys prevailing over the bad guys, and the bad guys won. That can't be where this ends. Luckily for us, there was a movie coming pretty soon called Endgame. And you knew, okay, The good guys will prevail there. And in the opening scene of Endgame, we see the heroes mad that they've lost and that half of their friends have disappeared, and so they fly over, they find Thanos, they find him, they go to destroy him, but first they try to figure out how can we reverse what he's done, and he tells them there is no way. He's destroyed the only option that they have. So they beat Thanos, but it doesn't solve any of their problems. They go back to Earth, and we flash forward a few years in the future, and this movie that we thought was going to be hopeful instead flashes over to a scene of Captain America in a counseling group. This is not the epitome of optimism, okay? And then you see Thor, and Thor's gotten fat, and he's just playing Fortnite all the time. And you're like, this is not the movie I signed up for. I tell you all of that because that's very much where we're at in the book of Esther. We're going to talk through a story today where it seems like the bad guys have won. And you're going to walk away today going, this isn't how the story's supposed to end. And good news, part 2's coming. But today I'm going to leave you there because I think that's where we need to be. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. We didn't finish all of chapter 2 last week. We've been working through this book of Esther. The first week we talked about really just the Persian Empire, kind of setting the scene, setting the tone for the world that Esther takes place in. It's the height of the Persian Empire. They're getting ready to go launch an attack against Greece that ends up failing, but Persia's got all the wealth, all the esteem, all the power in the world, and they make a habit of flaunting it, and it's not the kind of power or wealth that we would like them to have. They have a different set of values than the values that Jesus would have for us. And then last week, Cameron did an unbelievable job unpacking the truths of chapter 2, where we see that the king wants a wife. And so he basically hosts his own season of The Bachelor with him as the bachelor and picks his wife out of the fold, and that person happens to be this woman, Esther, who's Jewish. She's been hiding her ethnicity, but he picks her. And that's where we pick up at this point in the story. Those are kind of two of the main characters, the king, Ahasuerus or Xerxes, depending on which translation of the Bible you're reading, and Esther. But there's another third character that we've been introduced to, and we're going to zoom in really on him at the beginning of this story, a man named Mordecai. And here's what it says. After all those things have happened and the virgins have been gathered another time, it says this in verse 21. In those days, as Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, who guarded the threshold, became angry and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. And this came to the knowledge of Mordecai. He told it to Queen Esther, and Esther told the king in the name of Mordecai. When the affair was investigated and found to be so, the men were both hanged on the gallows, and it was recorded in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. It's a little bit of an aside. It feels kind of like a topic change, like we're focused on Esther and what's going on with Esther, and all of a sudden there's this kind of side story about Mordecai. It'll come to play in a couple weeks. We'll need that story, but what I want you to see here is Mordecai, the caretaker of Esther, Esther's cousin, is a good man who does his job well. He's been sitting at the gate. He overhears a plot to destroy the king, and then he goes and tells Esther and says, Esther, use your position of power and influence to go let the king know this is about to happen, and he saves the king's life, and that gets written down. And what would you expect to happen in that kind of situation? Maybe Mordecai gets a raise. Maybe a national holiday gets declared in Mordecai's honor, saying, this man saved the king. There's a bunch of different things you'd expect to happen. None of those things happen. Instead, at the start of chapter 3, verse 1, here's what happens. After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted, not Mordecai, Haman, the Agagite. Enter our fourth main character, the son of Hammedatha, and advanced him and set his throne above all the officials who were with him. And the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage. And truthfully, we don't really know why. There's a bunch of theories out there. They're all just, they're theories. Maybe he thought bowing down to Haman would be like worshiping him. Maybe he felt disrespected, like bowing down to Haman would lessen him. Maybe he was just frustrated that Haman got the promotion and he didn't. We don't know. And really, the text isn't so concerned as to why. It's just concerned that it happened. For some reason, Mordecai decided not to bow down to Haman. And so some of the king's officials come down and they start questioning him about it. Like, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you just bowing down? It's not that big of a deal. Bow down. This is what you're told to do. Haman's walking through. He's getting kind of angry. He doesn't like it too much. So like, just make everybody's life easier. Bow down. And Mordecai refuses. Time and time again, he says, I'm not going to do that. Verse 5, and when Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage to him, Haman was filled with fury. The problem is Haman's got a big ego problem. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone. So as they made known to him the people of Mordecai, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. If it seems like a bit of an overreaction to you, that's because it is. If you haven't noticed, it seems to be a theme in Esther. They love to overreact. This is now the third time overreactions have happened. The first time, wife tells him no. He goes, you know what? Then I'm never talking to you ever again. And so we have overreaction number 1. Last week, overreaction is I miss my wife. So we're going to host the biggest beauty pageant in the entire history of the world. And I'll find one from them. And then overreaction number 3, here Haman gets frustrated by Mordecai because he's not feeding his ego the way that he thinks he deserves. And so he decides, I'm not just going to kill Mordecai. I'm going to destroy everybody who looks like him. I'm going to wipe all of them out. And so the next scene flashes over to a planning meeting. There's a time at the beginning of the year where the Persian officials would get together and they would cast lots. They would cast, it's called Pur, that'll be important later in the story, in order to figure out how the calendar was going to fall and what important dates should we use. And so they're at this planning meeting where they're going to plan out the next year of calendar. What kind of laws are we going to pass? What are we going to do? What initiatives are we going to put forward? When are we going to attack? When are we going to stay at home and have times of peace? And so as they're planning all of this, Haman starts to plot. And he has the king's ear. So he says to the king, hey, listen, king, I've noticed that there's a group of people out there, and they have their own laws. They don't follow your laws. They have their own laws that they follow. And they're contrary to what the king would do. They're not good for you. They're contrary to your kingdom. And it is not a profit to you to keep them around, so instead, I've got an idea. What if we just got rid of all of them? Just make a decree that it'll be destroyed. And actually, you know what? I know that your bank account's a little bit low because of the whole Greece thing. You know, we're all still a little bit embarrassed about that. So you know what? Don't use your own money. I'll fund it. I'll give you 10,000 talents of silver, which is a crazy amount of money. I mean, we're talking about millions and millions, billions of dollars here. I'll fund it. I'll put the money into the bank account for you. You don't even have to worry about it. It's not going to affect the people's money. I'll use my own money. And we will just declare war on the Jewish people and we'll wipe them out. How about that? But Haman's actually, he's sneaky about it. He never says the word Jew. He just says this random vague group of people out there. There's a group of people out there who's plotting to destroy the king, who doesn't follow your orders, doesn't follow your ways, doesn't do your kind of things. And just imagine if you're the king in this situation. You don't know who he's talking about. You just know that there's a group of people out there to get you. And this guy's already got the solution. He's got an idea, he's got the money to do it, he's got the funds, the means, the method, he's got all of it. So the king does what kind of makes sense in that moment. He says, yeah, get rid of them. But he doesn't just say that. He doesn't just say, Haman, that's a good idea, that's a great plot, you should absolutely go take care of that for me. Or it's a great plot, let me go declare war on these people. Instead, what the king does in verse 10 is the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews. The signet ring was like the symbol of power. When you wrote something into law, they would take their signet ring and they would press the wax in to let them know the king had made this edict. And so when he hands this over to him, he's not just handing him a piece of jewelry. It's not like a friendship bracelet. It's like, hey, you have my authority. You go and do this. Continues on. Verse 11, and the king said to Haman, the money is given to you, the people also, to do with them as it seems good to you. Then the king's scribes were summoned on the 13th day of the first month, and an edict according to all that Haman commanded was written to the king's satraps and to the governors over all the provinces, to the officials of all the people, to every province in its own script and every people in its own language. It was written in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed with the king's signet ring. Letters were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces with instructions to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all Jews. Notice it says it 3 times. Destroy, kill, and annihilate. They're serious about this. Young and old, women and children, in one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. They're going to wipe them out completely. I mean, they make that very, very clear. They say that we're going to destroy them 3 times in 3 different ways with 3 different words, and then he's like, and just to clarify, I'm talking about the young people and the old ones. I'm talking about the women and the children. All of them. Wipe them out. And this is the day we're going to do it. Even write it down on the calendar. They say, mark your calendars, make the Google Calendar event, make sure that you're free that day, because this is the day we're destroying the Jewish people. Then verse 15, the couriers went out hurriedly by the order of the king, and the decree was issued in Susa, the citadel. And the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was thrown into confusion. So after all of this, the king and Haman hit the bar, while the rest of the city is confused and worried and dismayed. It says the whole city, by the way, not just the Jewish people in the city, not just the Jewish people throughout the kingdom. Everybody's like, what is going on here? Why is this whole people, what did they do to deserve the wrath of the king in this way? What is happening? Everybody's confused and the king's out getting drinks. And that's where the story ends for today. Super happy ending, not confusing at all, no questions, pretty self-explanatory. So I'll just pray, you can go get lunch. I'm just kidding. No. It's a confusing story, and it's strange, and it prompts a ton of questions in us. Like, why does this kind of thing happen? At the beginning of the story, Mordecai is this hero who just saved the king's life. In a matter of paragraphs, he's frustrated one of the king's officials to the point where not just he's going to die and be punished, but all of his people are going to die and be destroyed basically a year from now. How does that happen? How does a good guy who's done nothing wrong get punished to this degree? It's a question that we ask a lot. And then also, how are we supposed to respond in situations like this? Because listen, I don't know, and I certainly hope that you've never made somebody so mad that they decide to destroy not just you, but your entire race of people. It's probably not relatable. But what probably is relatable is some of us, most of us maybe, have been passed up for a promotion. Or you've had people who you thought were your friends go and sneak away and spread rumors about you, spread lies about you, attack your character, attack who you are. You've had people plot against you, even when you did nothing to deserve it. You people who hated you, scorned you, mocked you, talked poorly of you. That maybe they weren't literally planning your demise, but it certainly felt like it. They wanted to plant obstacle after obstacle after obstacle in your path. They wanted to make you feel like you were nothing. Most of us have been in situations like that before. And we ask ourselves, God, where are you in the middle of this? How could you ever let this happen? And we don't get a lot in the way of how to respond. I want to start with that question. How are we supposed to respond to this? We don't get a lot. We're really going to spend most of next week talking about that. When people plot against you, how are we supposed to faithfully respond? We're going to talk about that more next week, but what I want to note here is that the end of the story ends with confusion. And I want to let you know that's okay. Some of you right now might be in this season. And listen, some of you are going, Tyler, this is not relevant to me at all. Life is great. Things are going well. I love my job. I love my career. My family's going great. That's awesome. I celebrate that with you. This isn't one that you can just tune out. Because somebody you know is going through this, or probably there will be a season in your life where you will have this happen to you again, or for the first time if it's never happened. So how do we respond? I just want you to know confusion is an okay response. It's okay to start asking questions. God, why did you allow this to happen? Why is this happening to me? What are you doing here? What's going on? I don't understand. Those are okay emotions to feel. None of that's wrong. None of that's bad. It's appropriate sometimes in the moment. It certainly would be appropriate after the king makes this edict that feels like it came out of thin air. It's appropriate for you to go and ask these questions. I would just urge you, take them to God. Don't let them drive you away from God. Don't let those emotions, those initial confusions, turn your heart from Him. Instead, bring those questions to Him. He's big enough for them. I promise you, God can take those. But then I want to ask the next question. Where is God in the middle of this? Because He seems completely absent. And the problem is, when bad things like this happen, when it feels like people have turned their backs on us, when it feels like people are wronging us, and maybe they are, the problem is sometimes we get tunnel vision. We begin to miss what God is doing. For the last couple weeks, Sarah and I have been on vacation, kind of traveling around southern Missouri area. This last week specifically, we spent at Lake of the Ozarks, which is a yearly trip with me and my family. We do this because we are lake people. We love to boat and to jet ski and to fishing, to do all things that lakes are involved in. And this particular trip, every year we rent a house and my dad brings his boat and jet skis down. And on this particular trip, we got down to the lake. We brought the jet skis in, we brought the boat in, and we got the boat to the dock, and my brother, who was driving the boat at the time, hands the keys to my dad, and he says, "Dad, the boat's not driving right. Don't know what's wrong, it's just not working." And so my dad takes the keys, takes it out, and starts to fiddle with the engine, try to see what's going on, and he notices, there's a couple plugs that have broke. That's not a hard fix, just got to go buy the right parts, goes on to town, buys the right parts, comes back, fiddles with it, gets the plugs in, runs the engine again, still not working, the whole thing's flooding with water, big problem. So he calls the local marina, the local mechanics, and he says, "Hey, this is going on. You got any ideas?" And they say, "Yeah, we think it's a frost plug." And so he begins to look in, tries to find it, finds the frost plug. Awesome. But he can't do that job, so we have to take it into the mechanics, haul the boat, back out, into the mechanics. They say, "We can hopefully get it done to you by the end of the week, maybe." So we call every day, "Hey, you guys done yet?" "Nope, called back tomorrow." "Okay, call back the next day." "Nope." So here we are at a lake when we're supposed to be spending the week boating with no boat. And the second to last day of the trip, they call and they say, "Hey, it wasn't just a frost plug. Your engine block's cracked. You will not have a boat for the whole summer." And so we ended our lake trip where we were supposed to spend a whole week boating with no boat. And it became very apparent very clearly that there was going to be two options that we had throughout this entire week. There was one camp that we could have chosen, where we spent the entire week frustrated, mad, and angry, going, "Why, God? Why would you do this? We've worked so hard all year for this one trip. It's the one trip that we all get to spend a week together, and we do this just to spend time on this boat, and you've ruined the whole thing." That was an option, and you could have spent the entire vacation just angry, mad, and frustrated. You could have gotten tunnel vision and gone, "Where is God in the midst of this?" I know it's a silly illustration, but stick with me. There's another option. It's you pull back and you see the bigger picture, and you realize we had beautiful weather all week long. There wasn't a cloud in the sky the entire time. We had this beautiful scene. Normally, when we rent a house for Lake of the Ozarks, we spend all of our time thinking about what does the outside look like, what are the dock capabilities, how can we do this? For some reason this year, we weren't as worried about what the dock looked like. It was the first time we've ever rented a house with an entire game room that had a pool table, ping pong table, arcade games, all the things we could ever want to do inside. We were the closest to the town that we've ever been in. It wasn't really that far of a drive to get in town and do different things. It was weird. When you backed up, what you realized is God had been providing for this the entire time. Yeah, it stunk that the boat was gone, but it was the only time we've ever found ourselves in a situation where the boat could be gone and we still had more than enough to do. And by the way, our family was still all there, and we were all healthy. We're all able to enjoy a trip together. So listen, when you come into obstacles like that, you have two choices. You can get tunnel vision and spend your time asking questions about the problem, frustrated about what's going on in front of you, or you can back up and see the bigger picture, and it's only then that you can see what God's been doing. And the same's true in this story. It's easy to get tunnel vision and at the end of this go, God, what are you doing here? I don't understand. How could you let a good thing or a bad thing happen to a good person? But once you back up, you realize we've missed a couple details. God's actually tipped his hand to you. He's showing the full deck. He's telling you exactly what's about to happen, but if you haven't been paying attention, you'll miss it. Let me show you. In verse 1, we're introduced to Haman. But he doesn't just tell you that his name is Haman when he introduces him. It says, Haman the Agagite, which might not mean very much to you. It's the kind of thing we typically skip over in our Bible readings, don't pay much attention to. But this one's important. He tells you that he's Haman the Agagite because what he wants you to realize is that he's alluding you back to 1 Samuel 15. It's also important to note that when you're introduced to Mordecai back in the beginning of chapter 2, Mordecai is introduced in a very specific way too that's supposed to remind you of the first king of Israel, a man named Saul. Saul wasn't a great king by any means, but there's a story that's going to play a role here. Mordecai is spoken of in a way that's supposed to remind you of Saul. Haman is called the Agagite. Agag was a king back in 1 Samuel 15 who had direct conflict with Saul. He's trying to pull your attention back to a story. He's saying this conflict is going to look a lot like this conflict. And in 1 Samuel chapter 15, you read the story of Saul and the king of Agag, and God tells Saul, hey, go destroy this king and his entire nation. Wipe him out. And so Saul goes and does that, and it's kind of a complicated story because Saul does it kind of, and then God gets mad at him, and then he goes, okay, you're right, I shouldn't spare any of them, and then defeats the king of Agag, or the king Agag, the king of this foreign opposing nation. And so what the author's trying to do, to show you here up front, is this is not a new story. This is the same old story that's been playing out for generations, and the end will continue to be the same. We've got Saul and we've got Agag, but now it's just Mordecai and Haman, and it might look like Haman's going to win, but it's going to play out like it always has. Saul will have his victory. The Jewish people will have their victory. God will have their victory. There's one other detail that you might have not noticed. It says in verse, sorry, I'm trying to find it here. In verse 12, the king's scribes were summoned on the 13th day of the first month, and an edict according to all that Haman commanded was written to the king's satraps and to the governors over all the provinces and to all the officials of the people, to every province in its own script and every people in its own language. Seems like an unimportant detail here, but it tells you the date that the people got together to write this law and when the law was released. Now that date wouldn't be important to you unless you were a Jewish person who received the law on the 13th day of the first month of the year. Because that day happens to be the eve of Passover, which is a very important Jewish holiday. They received the law on the 13th, where it says that you have an enemy from Persia who's going to come and they're going to wipe you out. And then the very next day, you're celebrating this holiday that's reminiscent of the story back in Exodus where Moses tells Pharaoh, let my people go. And he says no, and over and over and over again. So finally God says, hey, take a lamb, slaughter it, wipe its blood on your doorpost. And then the angel that I'm going to send will know to pass you by. And anybody who has blood on their doorpost, the angel will pass them by. But anybody who doesn't have blood on their doorpost, the angel will go and kill their firstborn son. And by this I will let the Egyptians know that I am king and I am ruler and I am Lord. And so this happens. And Moses goes and meets with the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and Pharaoh says, get out of here. I can't handle this anymore. I can't have my people dying. And so Moses and the Jewish people begin to leave Egypt. And then Pharaoh changes his mind and decides, nope, I actually don't like that idea. I'm going to go get them. So he mounts his chariot with his whole army, and they begin to chase the Israelites into the wilderness, and the Israelites find themselves in a situation where they're trapped by the Red Sea in front of them, and the Egyptians coming to kill them behind them, and there's death on both sides. And then God tells Moses, put your staff in the sea, and I'll part the waves, and you'll walk on dry ground. So the Israelites walk through the Red Sea on dry ground, and the last Israelite crosses over to the other side. The sea collapses on the Egyptian army and wipes them all out. God creates a way where there seems to be no way. God destroys Israel's enemy when it seems like there was no hope for them. You see the parallels? On the 13th, they learn that they're about to be destroyed, and on the 14th, they celebrate the day where they thought they were going to be destroyed, but God rescued them. And what the author's trying to point you to is this isn't a new story. God has been rescuing his people in hopeless situations from the first day. This will not be any different. We serve a God who rescues us. Your story will not be any different. And what I don't want you to walk away with is the impression that everything's going to be all sunshine and rainbows. Okay, if I just pray hard enough and just hold to the faith, then everything's going to right itself, everything's going to be made right, it's all going to go hunky-dory from here. I do want you to know that you have a God who is working, who is on your side, and who is good, even when your situation isn't. See, so often when I found myself in situations like this, I begin to ask myself, not just where is God, but can I even trust him? Is he even still good? If God would allow something like this to happen, how could he be a good God? And so often I'm tempted in bad situations to let my bad situations define who God is. If my circumstances are bad, then God must be bad. And what I think the story of Esther is trying to show us is that's a bad way to go about life. It won't help you understand God better, and it won't make your circumstances any better. Instead of letting your circumstances define the goodness of God, I would challenge you to let the goodness of God define your circumstances. When we let our circumstances begin to define God, we get tunnel vision on our problems, and we say that God is responsible for them. God is this evil person who allows terrible things to happen, who doesn't care about us, who doesn't love us, who doesn't know us, who doesn't want anything to do with us. And none of that's true. It won't help you out of the situation, and it doesn't teach you anything about who God is. Instead, what we should do is in our circumstances, when the odds are stacked against us, when it feels like we have enemies surrounding us on every side, let the goodness of God define your circumstances. And when you do that, what you'll begin to see is that God is writing a story that you just don't see yet. The Israelites are confused. They don't get it yet. They don't see the story God's been weaving together. They missed the details. They missed the things God's doing behind the scenes. And they're just sitting there asking why. And truthfully, God's not going to give them an answer. He's not going to send an angel from heaven that just gives them hope and, hey, I'm going to deliver you. There's no prophet that he sends running through the streets that say, guys, don't worry, it's going to be okay. Instead, he just trusts that they'll continue to look to him, that they'll keep their eyes up, that they'll hold out for the bigger picture. And they don't get their why until the end of the story. So I'm not going to give you the why God allows these things to happen either. Because you might not get it, or you might not get it yet. And truthfully, if you found yourself in a situation like this today, whether it be, scholars kind of divide these things, whether you're going through suffering, which is just when something bad has happened to you, you've gotten a diagnosis, you've had disaster strike in your family, nobody did anything to you, but just we live in a fallen world and something bad has happened to you. It's called suffering. And you begin to ask yourself, God, where are you? Why are you allowing this to happen? Whether you find yourself in that situation or whether you find yourself the victim of evil, which is just when somebody's done something terrible to you. Somebody's treated you poorly, they've done wrong by you, they haven't done the things that God would call them to do. Whichever end of the spectrum you find yourself on, if you're in that situation today, I just want you to know God is still good and he's still working. And you might not get your why yet, but it doesn't change the fact that he's good. Let his goodness define your circumstances, and it's only then that you can back up and see the whole picture. One of the most influential Christians that has ever lived that is not in the Bible, to me and in my life, is a man by the name of Jim Elliot. You might have heard his story before. It's a pretty famous story. But if you haven't, let me just tell it to you. Jim Elliot was a Christian, a missionary, who believed that the Lord was calling him to go into missions. His family wanted him to be a youth minister, to stay in the States, go be a youth minister for some church. But he thought, you know what, there's 1,000 youth ministers. They're not hard to find. You can find youth ministers anywhere. So I'm not going to stay in the States and be a youth minister. Instead, I'm going to go over to Ecuador to a tribe where we don't even understand their language yet. Nobody on earth outside of this one tribe speaks their language, and I'm going to begin to explain to them the good news, the gospel message that Jesus is king and that he's come to invite them into his kingdom. He's made a way through the cross, through his death, through his resurrection. They can have everlasting life. I'm going to go tell them about this great story, this people who's never heard it before. And as he began to plan this trip to Ecuador, there was a few obstacles that stood in the way. People who backed out at the last minute, and he got a warning from one missionary who said, hey, this group of people you're going to, they're fine, but there's this other tribe near them. They're dangerous, and they're violent. Stay away from them. So Jim Elliot goes over to Ecuador, and he begins to minister to this tribe of people and to tell them about the gospel, to tell them about the good news, and it's received well. There's people coming to faith, and he marries a woman named Elizabeth. They have a great life. The ministry's flourishing, and they decide, you know what, this isn't enough. God's called us to more than this. And so Jim and some of his coworkers, some of his friends, decide, you know what, we're going to go over to this other tribe that we've been told is dangerous and violent. We're going to tell them the good news because they deserve to hear it too. And so they make contact a few different times. The first time is through a plane. They have a megaphone, and they drop gifts to them. And slowly but surely, they make contact with one or two or three, and everything's going well. It seems positive, and they're like, hey, we're going to break into this tribe. We're going to tell them the good news. We're going to reform them. They're not going to be known as this violent, dangerous tribe anymore. Instead, it's going to be a tribe that has a heart for Jesus. Until one day, 10 men from the tribe meet Jim and his friends before they can get to them. And Jim's the first one they stick a spear through. And then they proceed to one by one kill Jim and all of his friends. News of this gets back to Elizabeth and to the wives. And by all means, by any measure, what they should have done is they should have packed up their bags and gone home. Mourned the loss of their husband, said this was silly, this was dumb. I don't want to be any part of this. I'm going to go back home. I'm going to spend the rest of my life in the States, and I'm going to be safe, and I'll just stay where it's comfortable. But that's not what they did. They saw that God was writing a bigger story. And so Elizabeth Elliot and the rest of the wives continued to pursue this dangerous tribe, and they finally were able to make contact. And through their ministry, through their testimony, through their word, through their proclaiming of the gospel, that tribe now is faithful to Jesus. They committed their lives to him. They heard the gospel preached. Because in the midst of adversity, when people were plotting against them, they continued to look back and see the bigger picture. They knew that their God was still good, and he still had a mission to pursue and a message to proclaim. And that's true for us today. God has a mission for you, and he's got a message for you to proclaim. Don't let your circumstances stand in the way. Your God is still good, and he is still faithful. And the season in your story doesn't change that. I'd encourage you to step back and see the bigger picture. Flash forward to try to see the story that God is writing. And even if you can't see it yet, I just encourage you to continue to take steps in faith, knowing that you have a God who is working all things for good to those who are called according to his purpose. And we may never get to see the end of that story. Our story may look more like Jim than Elizabeth, but without Jim, Elizabeth's path wasn't paved, and that tribe doesn't come to know Jesus. God is writing a story with your life. I just encourage you to lean in and be a part of it. And there's no picture of that clearer than the story of Jesus. Well, the one who gave everything for us, who gave his life for our sake. And if you ever feel like God doesn't get it, he doesn't get what you're going through, how could he let this happen to you? He must not love you, he must not care about you. I just encourage you to look no farther than the cross of Jesus. where Jesus was plotted against, he was betrayed, he was lied to. And he took all of that, and he gave his own life up for our sake. He knows what it means to be lied to be betrayed, to be plotted against, to be schemed against, to have the evil things that men do directed at him. And by the way, he said the same will be true of us. He said, if they hated me, they'll hate you. And in fact, he even said, woe to you when all men speak well of you. Because they didn't speak well of him. So if we follow Jesus, don't be surprised when people hate you and despise you, when they scheme against you. Hold fast to the fact that you have a God who went before you, though, who gave his life for your sake, who took the schemes of man on his shoulders and showed that God had a bigger plan that we couldn't see. His own disciples couldn't see it. God was working a way where there seemed to be no way through his blood, through his death, through his resurrection.